I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, I would like you to meet a rather unusual politician, Mayor Brad West of Port Coquitlam. In my life in politics and journalism, I've sure met a lot of politicians. Most are decent people trying to do a good job. But once in a while, an individual stands out. At 23, Brad was the youngest councillor elected to Port Coquitlam Council. He served 3 terms, and in his first run for mayor, he received 86% of the vote. That's practically unheard of. And for his second run, he was acclaimed. First time ever that a mayoralty candidate was acclaimed in the city. So obviously successful from a very young age. But what interests me the most is what one commentator called his truth-telling. Brad West tends to say the things many people are thinking, but don't say. It is refreshing to hear a politician move off his briefing notes to express his thoughts or his criticisms without worrying about any controversy that might ensue. He has an opinion on Riverview, decriminalization, even China, for heaven's sakes. And even though his roots are firmly in the labor movement, he has criticized the NDP's move towards what he calls identity politics. People would like to pigeonhole him and say, oh, he's left, he's right, or this party or that, but so far it hasn't worked. Despite being asked by different political parties to run with them, he has so far declined. Busy and happy as mayor of Port Coquitlam, Brad West also chairs TransLink's Mayor's Council, as well as chairing Metro Vancouver's Finance Committee. Back in a moment. Wonder what he thought of the provincial election. We are in conversation with Mayor Brad West. Now, what did you think of that election?
Wow, it was quite something. Politics in BC is never boring. And this election certainly proved it. We still don't know the outcome, and it's going to be fascinating to watch how long the government lasts, whoever ends up forming the government. It looks like the NDP will eke it out. But it was just a fascinating election for those of us who love politics. I don't think you can get any better than that. Up late all night, poring over results. It'll be really interesting times in our province.
Something that surprised me, I don't know if it did you, but I was surprised when Premier Eby, in his speech that night, said, well, it was a majority win for progressives. That's not quite how I saw the election. What about you?
That might have been a bit of a stretch. I know, obviously, trying to put a brave face on. But, it showed in many ways that we have a divided province. Which I think is a real concern for our future. Increasingly, we're getting too polarized and people aren't talking to each other. And the political parties are less focused on trying to find consensus and middle ground and more solely focused on trying to find their base voters and turn them out. And I worry about what that does to British Columbia in the long term. I personally think we need to set aside some of the kind of culture war divisive issues and really focus on the core responsibilities of government, the things where you would hope we can all come together and maybe differ on how we get there, but agree on the overarching objective. Healthcare is there when and where you need it. Our kids are going to good schools, getting a good education, prepared for the future. The economy is strong, provides good jobs, and produces the revenue we need for all these services we require. The rest of it starts to get, I think, a little bit noise. And it can be, again, I think, quite divisive when you get into some of the more cultural issues. And I hope that we find our way in British Columbia back to a place where we're delivering for people things that matter in their daily lives, that make a material difference to their life. And we don't go through another election where it's all about, what someone posted on Facebook a number of years ago. It's not about what sign is in front of Chip Wilson's yard. Those things don't make a difference to people's lives at the end of the day. So that's my optimistic hope for the future for our province.
Yeah, it was so nasty. I was surprised at all the personal stuff that was going back and forth, not really getting into the issues that you've mentioned. Now, you're a Labour guy through and through, but you've also said that with all of this identity politics, you felt that the NDP was more worried about pronouns than they were about paychecks. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a very working class family. My dad was a construction worker. My mom, a cashier at London Drugs. Before them, their parents, my grandparents, were working class, blue collar people. They were able to produce a better life for their children and then their children, and just a hell of a lot of hard work by all of them. And so, in their time, their natural political home was the NDP, because the NDP was the political party that felt that the deck was too often stacked against people who didn't have a lot of power, but who went and worked really hard and deserved a fairer shake. Somewhere along the line, I do feel that emphasis has been lost. I think about my mom, as I said, she was a cashier. We lost my dad when I was 10. He passed away. My sister was 7. My mom went and got a second job, and just worked herself to the bone to try and provide a good life for my sister and I. I appreciate it all the more now that I'm a father. I have 2 young sons. At the time, I never really appreciated how much my mom was sacrificing so I could still play hockey and the things that I really enjoyed, and same with my sister. And so anyway, she worked incredibly hard. Our life changed for the better when she got a union job. She got a union job, and then she only had to work 1 job. We got some benefits. So I've seen in my own life the benefit that can come from a collective agreement and the ability to get a fair shake for regular people. As I said, that was supposed to be really the bread and butter of the NDP. And as I was growing up, that was certainly the world that I was immersed in, or not immersed in, but a lot of the discussion that was going around me was in that vein.
And it's slipping away?
I think it is. I think in recent times, the party, and this is not specific to the NDP, this is the political left globally, in Europe, in the United States, and certainly in Canada. For whatever reason, the modern left and its political parties have really chosen to emphasize identity politics. I think a lot of that emerged out of academia and through the universities. There's some energy and enthusiasm behind that in those areas, and I think that it's fair to say that a lot of those folks populate the political left, and I think that that language and that framing and focus and lens became very dominant. And I think what has fallen by the wayside is an emphasis on traditional bread and butter, meat and potatoes, issues that matter in people's lives. And that's where I think the political left, where it's the NDP here, the Democratic Party in the United States, social democratic parties across Europe, have lost their way. And what you increasingly see is this political realignment where people who are blue collar, who are working class, who have high school education, are increasingly voting for right of center parties. and that was not the way it was, a couple of decades ago. So there's something happening there. And I think the political left has to take some responsibility for it. It's very easy to point a finger and say, oh, those people are this, or they're that, or they're the other thing. I don't see a lot of reflection internally about what are we doing wrong that is causing people who traditionally would be our supporters to look elsewhere. What are we failing to communicate? What are we missing here? And so that is a critique that I have of generally of the left.
So where do you fit in?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, as you said, I believe strongly in the values of trade unionism. I've seen the difference that can make in people's lives. As I articulated, I've seen the difference it's made in my family's life. Without a collective agreement, life could have been a lot different for me and my sister and my mom. And so, first and foremost, I really believe in those values, in the values of fairness, making sure that ordinary people have a good shot at life. I don't think that, where you're born should determine where you end up in this life. And so those are the values that I feel very strongly about. I have a hard time always pinpointing which political party is speaking to those in a way that resonates with me. The longer I'm in politics as well, the more I value my independent streak.
I value independence, and it's hard to find in politics, especially with the party system. A lot of issues still to talk about. We're just going to take a quick break. As a mayor, Brad West has to face some of the most difficult issues I've ever seen on the social scene. For instance, the disorder in our streets. Let's look at a couple of them. Mental illness, for instance. How did we get to this state, and what are the solutions?
Well, I don't think we got here overnight. That's the first point. And I think that is true of many issues. There's always a tendency to want to look for that immediate silver bullet solution. But the reality and the truth of the matter is, and I wish we were more upfront with people about this, is on many issues, we've got to where we've got because of years, if not decades, of bad decisions, poor policy, bad luck, maybe some things that are out of our control.
Such as closing Riverview?
Well, I think that's one, right? This is not a partisan thing. This over successive governments of all stripes, which is, I have a theory about why that is when we get into that. But Riverview is, I think, a perfect example. Now you get some people sort of, characterizing it as, this one flew over the cuckoo's nest institution where all these awful things happen, and on that basis they say, well, we should never do something like that again. Well, of course you're not going to have, the standards of the 1970s apply in 2024. I mean, that's obvious, and to use that as an excuse to not look at that model is, I think, just very foolish. Clearly, there is a place in British Columbia for a mental hospital for people who are so unwell, who are prone to violence, who are a danger to themselves and to others, and have demonstrated that repeatedly. There has to be a place for them to go. The alternative is what I saw as I drove in this morning from Port Coquitlam. We have people just all over the street. So does every person who suffers from mental illness need to be in a Riverview-like hospital? No, of course not. But there is a place, I think, for an institution-type setting along that spectrum of care. And I think, closing Riverview rather than reforming it and utilizing it as a space for mental wellness was a historically stupid decision.
I remember I was on council around that time, and I was the odd man out, and so I went and did a couple of editorial meetings just saying closing Riverview absolutely, and just giving everybody a bus ticket to the downtown east side without any kind of support, without housing, without medication. It's a disaster, and of course it has become a disaster. But at the time, they thought, the journalists thought, maybe they still do, that I was an absolute right-wing crazy because everybody should be closer to home and out in the community. So we do have failures, and I would say another failure is the pilot on decriminalization.
Absolutely. And again, from my perspective, entirely predictable as well. We have seen other jurisdictions try this, one very close to us in Portland, and it was a disaster there, and they reversed course. So rather than look at that and say, I wonder what might happen, BC decides to forge ahead. And it didn't take very long to see the same consequences play out. In Port Coquitlam, a particular incident that disturbed me is almost immediately after decriminalization, we started seeing an uptick in public drug use. And our bylaw officers are so often on the front line of this in our community, and are incredible people who act with amazing compassion, but are also there to ensure that rules are followed and everybody gets to enjoy our community. Everybody. And so, we had an instance where there was I believe it was a 9-year-old's birthday party. It was in one of our premier parks, very popular for kids' birthday parties, amazing playground, and picnic shelters and all of that. And there was an individual in there who was smoking, I believe it was crack, right in the kids' playground after decrim. And the parents politely approached the individual and said, we're going to have our son's birthday party here. Do you mind going somewhere else? And he told him to F off. So what did the parents do? The parents called the police. Pretty normal. That's what most people would do. We have the situation. The police said, I'm sorry, that's not against the law. We can't come and deal with that. So they phoned me this was on the weekend, they phoned me the next day. City Hall was open on Monday. I took the call, told me the story, and then the next city council meeting, Port Coquitlam was the first municipality in Metro Vancouver to pass a bylaw that prohibited public drug use, trying to undo some of what the province allowed. I mean, that's one small story. There were many, many, many of them right across British Columbia, because what the province did was they removed from the police a tool, the legal authority to be able to deal with situations that I think are unacceptable. It's not lacking compassion to believe that someone should not be smoking crack in a child's playground. And the whole framing that the government tried to use around this, about this was compassion, this about trying to reduce stigma, I thought was nonsense. And it clearly didn't work in the period in which they implemented this and that we had in British Columbia. The number of overdose deaths went up.
And the police tell me that having been through that, now that they've recriminalized it for certain spots,
yes,
you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
100%.
They're so used to being out there and doing it that the police are having a terrible time.
It's done a lot of damage. It's hard to unring the bell.
Another complicated issue for you. How about housing? We've got over 60 initiatives from federal, provincial, municipal governments, some of them overlapping, some of them conflicting, telling you what to do with housing.
Yeah.
How did you like being told by the province what your zoning should be?
Well, you know me, I loved it. I said, please,
please come and roll.
I didn't know they wanted to be mayor of Port Coquitlam. I thought they got elected to provincial government. They all of a sudden wanted to be mayor and city councillor of every province or every city in the province. The pace of regulatory change on housing is completely overwhelming. the staff in the city who are responsible for processing applications and getting things through the system are just absolutely overwhelmed. I want them focused on approving things, making sure that it's done properly, of course, to protect people and to protect the community, protect home buyers, and then getting it done. Right now, they're buried in paperwork. They have to file all sorts of reports with Victoria. So the amount of bureaucracy that all of this has created, that's where our planning staff are focused now. They have to focus on all of Victoria's red tape and regulations rather than actually development applications. And I hear from home builders as well that they feel like they're absolutely swamped with just all of this coming at once from Victoria and from Ottawa. I understand that from provincial perspective that there is a need for more housing. I think most reasonable people would agree with that. And that's exactly what we were doing. That's exactly what we were doing. And it seems like because maybe there were a couple of bad actors, rather than dealing with them, they decide, oh, okay, we'll do a one-size-fits-all, and it's just been total chaos. It's been a real distraction from what we should be focused on. And so I don't think it's helped. I don't think it's resulted in additional housing being built. It's also taken, in our city and other cities, decades and decades of community planning and thrown it out the window. So it's very challenging.
There are many challenges for being a mayor, and there are also a lot of people in the community who are hoping you'll look at perhaps provincial or maybe federal politics. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
For the time being, still Mayor of Port Coquitlam. I confess I was pretty discouraged about all of the negativity and personal insults that were thrown around in this recent election. Comparatively little attention was given to cost of living, secured care, repeat offenders. These are issues we all care about. Therefore, it is encouraging to be able to talk about difficult issues in a thoughtful way with Mayor Brad West. Please let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.